From Wispolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with Wispolitics, and you're listening to Capital Chats. Today, I'm here to share an interview with Senator Kelda Roys, who is running as a Democrat for governor. Here's what she had to say. Well, thank you, Senator Roys, for joining me on the podcast today. I think we'll start off just talking about your gubernatorial run. And, this isn't the first time you've run for governor, so what made you decide to get into this race again?
I think this is a moment of incredible danger for our country. We have a Republican regime that is hell-bent on destroying the rule of law and undermining our democracy, and we need a governor with the courage to stand up to him and help protect Wisconsinites from the harms that he's causing. At the same time, it's also a moment of incredible opportunity in our state. For the first time, we will have full elections for the legislature on new, fairer maps, and I think that creates a real opening for us to be able to govern if we have a governor with the courage and the competence to actually get things done.
Yeah, could you talk a little bit about the biggest threats to the state that you see, I guess at the federal level you mentioned?
Certainly, I think one of the biggest threats is to our economy, the way that the high costs that are caused by Trump's tariffs tax, the uncertainty and the collapse in healthcare access, and particularly how that's going to hit rural areas as a result of the federal budget bill. Those are top of mind for me. But I mean, there's really no aspect of our state that isn't negatively impacted by what the Republican regime is doing, from our educational system to funding for transportation to our ability to research things like Alzheimer's and cancer. We have a lot here in Wisconsin riding on being able to stand up to the Trump administration.
So, if you were elected governor, what would be the biggest priorities for you in office?
My biggest priorities for Wisconsin are to raise wages, to lower costs, and to give people more freedom to live the lives that they wish. I think Wisconsin can be a place where everyone has the freedom to thrive, no matter who you are or where you're from. But people have to be able to afford their lives. And so for the biggest ticket items like housing and healthcare, childcare, groceries and utilities, we need the state to take action to make those things more available and more affordable.
Yeah, so there's a big field of Democrats in this race at this point. What makes you different from the rest of those candidates, and how are you kind of trying to differentiate yourself?
Yeah, it's wonderful to have a big crowded field. I think we're all friends, and it's an exciting opportunity. But I think the things that set me apart are courage and competence. So the courage to really stand up to the Trump administration. I have done so consistently. And of course, not just this administration, but I've been standing up to bullies and billionaires throughout my whole career. The second thing is competence. Our next governor is going to have a window of opportunity, but it's not going to be big. To do things like make sure we fund our public education system, invest in early childhood and higher ed, and really fix our healthcare infrastructure, which is in tatters and going to be made worse by the federal budget changes. We're only going to be able to do this if we have strong leadership from the governor's office. I've served not just in the state assembly, but also in the state senate. I have more legislative experience than any other candidate. I'm also the only candidate who has served on the state budget committee, the joint finance committee, and I know that state budget very well as how the agencies operate. So I know how to get in there from day one and have a plan to help put Wisconsin on a better forward moving trajectory, to help raise wages for people and lower costs. And the ability of Democrats to deliver on our campaign promises is critically important. When Democrats are put in charge, we can govern well, but we have to have strong leadership. And I'm someone who has spent 25 years in and around state government, not just in the legislature, but as an advocate, as a small business owner for 13 years, as an attorney, and of course as a mom. And I've been able to get things done in every type of legislative environment, not just when Democrats are in control, but when Republicans have been in control, when we've had split legislatures. I've worked closely not just with my Democratic colleagues, but with Republican colleagues on issues that I think would surprise people. And that is what people should expect from a governor of a purple state like Wisconsin, that we can and will work with anyone and everyone to actually deliver.
Yeah, so Governor Tony Evers, you're running to succeed him. Thinking back on his time in office, is there anything that you would have done differently from him?
Well, Governor Evers, I think, has done the best that he can do with the legislature that he has. But certainly there are some areas of disagreement. I would not have expanded voucher program funding. I think that public dollars should be for public schools that are accountable to the public. And that's just my fiscal conservatism as a taxpayer. I don't want my money going to unaccountable schools that can discriminate against people and don't have to meet the same basic standards that our public schools do. I also have been a longtime champion of the ability of nurse practitioners to be able to provide healthcare directly to patients. I think it's really important in a state like Wisconsin that suffers both from not enough providers overall, especially in the rural areas, but also from the kinds of shameful wealth and racial disparities that we've seen around the state. And so I've championed this bill to basically enable nurse practitioners to provide more care. And for a long time, I was the only Democrat on that bill, and the governor actually vetoed it several times. Finally, we were able to build broader support with Democrats, and he signed it. But that's definitely an area where we disagreed.
Yeah, sure. You mentioned also your experience on the Joint Finance Committee. I'm curious, how would that inform how you approach a budget if elected as governor?
Well, I know what the state budget looks like. I know where the money is and where it isn't. And what I've seen is over 15 years, and actually really over 3 decades, is a state government that has flattened our tax structure, which used to be progressive. So now the working class and the middle class are shouldering all of the burden of funding public services. Meanwhile, the very wealthiest among us and big businesses are not paying their fair share to keep us safe. And what that has meant is money is not going into our local public schools. It's not going to our local governments for things like public safety, fire protection, to say nothing of keeping the streets clean and libraries and parks, right? So Wisconsinites expect their tax dollars to be spent responsibly. Republicans have failed to do that. Instead, we've been sitting on a multi-billion-dollar a year surplus, even as our schools have to lay off teachers, they're closing programs, our local governments don't have the money they need to sustain public safety programs. And we have to get serious about fiscal responsibility in this state. And that means stopping this very destructive and inefficient cycle of forcing referendums, forcing local property taxpayers to have to pick up the tab for really what the state should be supporting.
Yeah, I also want to ask you about the Republican field for governor. Obviously you're in the Dem primary right now, but I'm curious, what do you think of the candidates that have come out, and who do you see as your biggest competition?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Republicans continue to go down the path of extremism. They want somebody that's going to show fealty to Donald Trump and not Wisconsin families. And I think that's a mistake, from their part, but it's been a pretty clear pattern. And it's disappointing to see people like Tom Tiffany and Ron Johnson in Washington just advocating for whatever Donald Trump decides he wants to do that day when he wakes up, and doing often so at the expense of Wisconsin families. Our farmers, our small businesses are struggling mightily under the high costs of these tariffs. They're suffering from the loss of markets. We've had just terrible impacts economically on every single family. We all feel it at the grocery stores. And it's a result of Trump's failed policies, of which Tom Tiffany and Ron Johnson have been very eager proponents. We deserve a governor who's going to stand up for what's best for Wisconsinites, not what Trump and his Washington cronies want.
I guess before we wrap it up, is there anything else you really want Wisconsinites to know about yourself or your campaign?
Well, I think something people might not know about me is that I was actually born in Marshfield, Wisconsin, and I spent my early years outside of Medford, which is in Taylor County. It's north of Highway 29, where my family and I lived in a one-room schoolhouse, and I had a pet goat as a child. So when I think about Wisconsin, I don't just think about Madison or Milwaukee, even though I love those cities. I think about the shores of Lake Superior. I think about the North Woods, Central Sands. This is an incredible state. It's a diverse state. We deserve a governor who works to build connections and to fight for people in every single part of the state. And that's exactly why I'm running for governor, and that's what I'm going to do.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's podcast. If you want to learn more about the Democratic race for governor, you can head to our website at wispolitics.com. For now, I'm Kate Morton. This is Wispolitics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.